Here we are again with my 2025 NFL Deep Dive Series. Now my number 18 team, the Seattle Seahawks. Make sure to hit the thumbs up and subscribe if you haven't already. Push me out in the algorithms because we're making moves. We're making moves. And nobody made more of a lateral move than the Seattle Seahawks when they got rid of Geno Smith and brought in Sam Darnold. It was kind of lateral. You'll see where I kind of got Sam Darnold, but it was an ambitious move because they're pretty much banking that Sam Darnold now is hitting that upswing of his career after all these years and that they're picking him up at the perfect time. Going to mix him in with offensive coordinator Clint Kubiak, and everything's going to be copacetic. He's going to go into being a top 5 quarterback in the NFL. He's borderline there after what happened in Minnesota. Maybe I'm a little too high on Sam Darnold. That's very possible, and I think that, no Seattle fan is going to say that I am. I'll say that right now. But maybe that's what's affecting this ranking, bringing him up to 18, because I do think Sam Darnold finally has done it. And I do think that their offseason was a little, it did hurt Darnold's potential more than it helped. I mean, they brought in Cooper Kupp. They lost Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf. But I don't know why they brought in Cooper Kupp, because he's incredibly redundant with what they have in Jackson Smith and Jigba, who actually started to look like he was getting up into that level. Lacking in the wide receiver 3 department to a degree. Really deep at the tight end position. And we'll talk about 3 really strong tight ends that they have, in my opinion, including a rookie and a second-year player there to go along with Noah Fant. A deep running back room that simply is unreliable, though. Injuries, commitment to the run. Maybe now they're bringing in Clint Kubiak, going to like a zone-heavy, that Kubiak, Shanahan offense, going into that zone-heavy system will help out, especially with an athletic offensive line that they're continuously building, bringing in Gray Zabel in the draft. But Kenneth Walker, Zach Charbonnet, sneaky pickup, and Damian Martinez out of the U creates a very interesting dynamic in the running back room that hopefully a good mixture around can keep Kenneth Walker healthy in particular. I think he missed 6 or 7 games last year because of injury. Zach Charbonnet is a good back. He's starting caliber in my opinion, but it's just a matter of figuring out a very balanced flow between that running back room to create a really effective offense for Sam Darnold, but the offensive line is going to have to step up. They're an offensive line that is frustratingly inconsistent, so hopefully Kubiak comes in, getting to that zone-heavy run game, and then it takes them off. Maybe they'll finally get the clicking there, despite having Charles Cross, who I think is one of the better left tackles in the league. The defensive side of the ball, they added a lot, and, they got Nick Emmanwori, who's going to complete that 3 safety set with Julian Love, who had an amazing season, Kobe Bryant, who had this sneaky cornerback / safety season, but bringing in that Baltimore defense that Mike Macdonald used to get this job in the first place last year when Baltimore ran that 3 safety defense to absolute perfection. And now with Nick Emmanwori, they're actually able to run it probably as effectively as Macdonald wants to. The linebacking group is just, it's good enough. They complement each other well. The defensive front, very deep on the interior defensive line. Sneaky deep at edge, depending on what your thoughts are on Jared Ivey. I'm high on Jared Ivey. But from an overall talent level, they don't really thrive as much as you would expect. I think Mike Macdonald's still trying to put all the guys in the right place and allow them to thrive and develop outside of what we saw from Julian Love in particular last year. And Leonard Williams, for example. There wasn't really anyone who truly overly thrived in that defense. Devon Witherspoon's still a good player, but he didn't necessarily thrive at a high level. He was still like a top 20 cornerback last season, in my opinion, especially coming out of the slot, being able to go in and out. But we'll get to what can continue there when we get to the player evaluations. But we start, as always, with the coaching evaluations, and we start with the head coach. The 23rd ranked head coach, 77 grade. Mike Macdonald, had a decent first year as the head coach of Seattle. I understand why he got the job, how he's progressing, and his goals overall. I think that personnel-wise, it was very obvious that he's really trying to recreate that Ravens defense from 2 years ago that got him this job. I think he's a great defensive mind. Again, I just fear, we just covered it with Jonathan Gannon. It's hard for me to rank these defensive head coaches that high because unless they take on like this CEO type role, it almost never really goes all that well. Because you look at Tomlin, you look at what he did in Pittsburgh. He's a CEO of that organization. He's not really just a defensive coach. Same thing with Pete Carroll, the former Seattle coach. So it's a tough spot for him to be in. I think that he can continue to grow in this role. His defensive staff with Aiden Durd, the 22nd ranked defensive coordinator for me, 78 grade. It's an interesting little staff. Leslie Frazier, I have to spotlight. You see him pictured there as part of the defensive staff. He's a key factor for me for this defensive, the defensive strategies, defensive coaching in general. He's like the big veteran in the room right now because, Aiden Durd and Mike Macdonald, they're very young guys, not overly experienced, certainly not in these types of roles. Leslie Frazier's really done it all his whole career. And for him to come in and him to work with Macdonald and specifically with Aiden Durd, I think that's going to allow Mike Macdonald to take on that CEO role. And we'll see this year how he does with it. I think they know what kind of defense he wants to run. The personnel matches up perfect for it. Now I think it's just sort of him handing a lot more responsibility off to Durd with Leslie Frazier as that true assistant head coach to allow more focus to be put on the defense that Mike Macdonald can then focus on being the head coach and building an overall culture for this organization, which I don't really know what that culture would be. He's worked with the Harbaughs for a majority, if not all, of his coaching success up to this point at the University of Michigan and Baltimore. So I do wonder if we're going to start seeing that Harbaugh culture get introduced here in Seattle. And if he can introduce that culture into this team, then it's going to be a huge win for them. And because he's so young, this is a coach that you can have forever. Very Mike Tomlin-esque in that sense. But there also could be a thing where there's constant turnover at the offensive coordinator position, and they never really get that right or consistent because they keep getting their offensive coordinators poached away. And the defense doesn't really sit in the top 5, top 10 consistently every single year. And then you start to wonder if Mike Macdonald's the right choice for the organization. I think, unfortunately, defensive coaches get that treatment in the NFL. I'm not saying it's right, I'm not saying it's wrong, but it is what it is. And I think nothing is clearer than that but the introduction of Clint Kubiak as the offensive coordinator. He comes in for me. He's my 10th best offensive coordinator. They made a commitment to making the offense good right now. You saw it when they brought in Sam Darnold, who we'll get to, and you see it when they add Clint Kubiak as the offensive coordinator. Now, Kubiak's bringing in that Shanahan, Kubiak, McVay, you name it, style offense into this organization. And I think that it really is going to suit the skill set really well, which is why he also gets the number 10 grade for me, because I think him working with a lot of these offensive talents is going to be extremely beneficial. I think it's going to be extremely beneficial for Sam Darnold, who's just coming from that branch of style of offense working with Kevin O'Connell in Minnesota, where he just had the best season of his career and may have finally established himself as a top 10 quarterback in the NFL. He certainly played like one for most of last season. We'll get to what my thoughts are on him, but to have that continuity was also a very great move by Seattle. I think getting Kubiak and then going and getting Darnold replacing Geno Smith, even though from a talent perspective, you could see it as very much a lateral move or similar or close to a lateral move. I think being able to give Darnold another year of that system is, you anticipate him growing further, and as do I. I think he's finally found his stride here. And Kubiak, I think they have the pieces on the offensive line also to make this work. Now, we'll get to some of the personnel decisions later. I think that, and I'll put this on Macdonald and I'll put this on the general manager, the turnover that they had in the weapons room, losing DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett while adding Cooper Kupp, I don't necessarily feel like that's the best for the overall offense's production. I think that puts Clint Kubiak in a bit of a rough situation because of the sheer redundancy of having Cooper Kupp with Jackson Smith and Jigba, which we'll get to when we get to the weapons group. But how do you roll both those guys out and use them to the best of their abilities at all times? I don't know how Kubiak can go about that. Now, Cooper Kupp is a great player to have because he understands the system. So maybe it's one of those things where you bring him in so early in the year, you have someone out there who understands the responsibilities in the run game and in the pass game with the motions and all that, until the younger, higher upside at this point player, Jackson Smith and Jigba, has a full, firm grasp on it, and then Cooper Kupp kind of just works his way out. But I mean, why would you? The signing didn't make a whole lot of sense to me, and I think it puts the offense in general without a true outside wide receiver like what they had with DK Metcalf. I question the wisdom of these decisions, and I think that could hurt the perception, at least, of Mike Macdonald as well. If this offense gets out to a slow start, will it be viewed as a fallback of the defensive head coach not being able to step in and help the offense? And is that seen as a detriment more so than a benefit if the culture doesn't really match up to what you're hoping it becomes? And if Clint Kubiak can't make it work the way that he truly can when he has the correct personnel out there, I mean, maybe do you convert JSN into an outside wide receiver early in the year? Is that maximizing the skill sets that you have? I don't know, because then you also have Noah Fant, who's like a bigger slot out of the tight end position. So you've kind of stymied yourself here without having like these outside wide receiver threats where it's like, are you going to play the entire offense inside the numbers, inside, along the hashes rather than outside, because you just don't have the bodies? And how does that affect the offense's ability to operate, and how does that affect the run game? Because they have a really good running back group as well that we'll get to. That will they be able to execute to their full ability if they just are all living on top of each other? Or is this by design and put someone with a lot of speed on the outside who maybe not be perceived as having a lot of high upside talent, and just use the speed as the sole weapon here? I mean, could that be the strategy? The personnel with a style of offense where they can run it from a strategic output is going to be a real challenge for this staff. And I have all the faith in the world of Kubiak. It's just, is it too much for him to overcome? Now, with that said, if this offense does operate at a pretty high level, which I anticipate that they can, even with these shortcomings, Kubiak's a one-and-done offensive coordinator here, and then you get yet more turnover at this position, which I think could hurt the overall perception of the coaching staff as well, again, and stop the progression of some of these guys on the offensive side of the ball if you're getting this constant turnover at this position, because this is the risk of signing one of the higher end guys, especially in this type of offensive system that's just turning out head coaches left and right in this league. And almost all the coaches that are coming out of that tree show a lot of success, at least in terms of their team's offensive production. You look at the Rams, the 49ers, the Vikings, Cleveland to a large degree as well, with Stefanski, when he actually has a functioning quarterback in there. So that could be a detriment to this team long term, but I think short term they're in a really good spot here if they can figure out those outside wide receiver roles, or figure out a way to use these traditional slot guys who are best suited as slot guys as outside receiver roles. Maybe throw in some more motions and whatnot, maybe work some play action a little bit more, get them out in space. These deep crossing routes maybe will work a little bit more. We'll see how they go about that, but that's going to be something I think for Seattle fans to watch with the offense, is how they roll out the personnel, especially early in the season, to try and make the offense function at a high level. Cutting in here real quick for an ad break, but there aren't any ads. It's like a pattern in all videos so far on this channel, but you guys can help change that by making this a completely not useless cut-in moment by liking the video and subscribing. Push it out to the algorithms, make YouTube tell the sponsorship people that they should sponsor me, and then they contact me and they sponsor me, and I make monies, and then I can do more of these videos because I'll be making monies rather than doing it for free. And I will get the player valuations. Let's go. So I told you guys I was high on Sam Darnold. He's my 7th ranked quarterback coming into this season. I think playing in the same system definitely helps him, and it gives him the 91 grade because he was great in this similar system just last year, coming out of that tree of coaches and that strategy. And I think being able to continue in that, obviously with some little differences here because Clint Kubiak's going to run things just a little bit differently than what we saw from O'Connell. But it'll be similar enough that I think he'll be able to really execute at a high level, and I think he's going to... he's playing with a little bit of a worse team than what he had just the previous year before, especially in the weapons group. Doesn't have Justin Jefferson, doesn't have TJ Hawkinson, doesn't have that Christian Darrisaw, Brian O'Neill tackle combination. But this is where he now gets to prove that he is a top-tier quarterback. Now that he's got a system that he can clearly work with, now it's up to him to push the entire roster forward, to accelerate the players around him and show that he can be that top quarterback. Because when he was, his stats last year, he was phenomenal. Now, he put the ball in harm's way a lot. 27 turnover-worthy plays, which you want to bring that down. That's a lot of forcing the ball down the field. But when he did put the ball down the field deep, he was phenomenal. He was amazing at play action. When he was kept clean, he was great. Even against the blitz, when he was able to get that ball out and identify the blitz, and if the team was able to pick it up with some good blocking from the running backs, tight ends were able to chip in, offensive line communicated well. When opposing teams blitzed, he was picking them apart. So if this offensive line and the running backs in the backfield, maybe do some max protection or whatnot to fight these blitzes, that with less guys out there in coverage, Sam Darnold's going to be able to make big plays happen. He wasn't even that bad against pressure either last year. Like a C+ grade against pressure, that's as good as you could ask for. That's a pretty good, solid grading level there. The intermediate throws, he was good. You want to see him be a little bit more accurate with some of those like 12 to 15 yard outs and all that. But from a short and deep ball game, he was very accurate. He wasn't afraid to go down the field. He had 34 big time throws. So at least counteracting those 27 turnover worthy plays, he was pushing that ball down the field, giving Minnesota a lot of action. And I think you can bring that here to Seattle. And, in the film room, in the way you strategize, just dial it back a little bit. You don't got to be so aggressive. You don't got to be, putting the ball in harm's way that significantly that often. You can dial it back a little bit and still be productive, still be very effective. Not a lot of drops, 76.5 adjusted completion percentage last year. So he was putting the ball where it was supposed to be. The receivers were making the plays they were supposed to for the most part. And I think coming into this situation here, getting a guy like Cooper Kupp, who when he's healthy can be very reliable, JSN, who had that breakout season, I think you can... It's obviously to a lesser talent degree, at least in the onset here, but he at least has something transferable in terms of player types. Justin Jefferson is like an outside receiver who plays really good in the slot, kind of can do the same. JSN can kind of do the same things that Jefferson does in an offense. Noah Fant can kind of do what TJ Hawkinson does in the receiving game a little bit. You want to get somebody in there who can be effective as a tight end in the blocking perspective, can run some of those motions, those split motions, split zone runs and all that. But I think just having Darnold and let him just, give him some structure, focus on what he does really well, which is, you got a whole season's worth of tape now on it. And you're in a real good spot here with Sam Darnold. And, they drafted Jalen Milroe, who I'm remiss that I wouldn't speak about because I expected him to go to New Orleans. Just because when Kellen Moore got there, I went, okay, they don't have a quarterback. Jalen Milroe is basically Jalen Hurts when Jalen Hurts came into the NFL. He's going to be a really effective, powerful runner who needs to develop his passing game a bit, but he's a good enough runner that you can maybe hide it And then he ended up here in Seattle as a backup, and I went, I don't know about this. I don't know that this was necessarily great for them. I think that, you play Darnold for a couple years, and then I guess you assess after that. If you don't expect Darnold doesn't play up to his contract and like high expectations that they have of him. But then you have Drew Lock, who's probably going to be the actual quarterback too, just because Jalen Milroe requires such a very specific offense at this stage in his career. But do you get ultra creative, and do you throw in packages at the goal line maybe where Jalen Milroe's running just some traditional read option? Or do you have Milroe, Charbonneau, and Walker in the backfield at the goal line and run triple option? Do you get like collegy on it? I think you may see some package in here with Jalen Milroe where he's able to just be an athlete more so than having to be a traditional quarterback. And I would also look for maybe a little, going full Jalen Hurts, some tush push. Maybe. I don't know. I just feel like you had to touch upon that to truly get the true overarching view of this quarterback room. But there's no secret that Darnold is the guy. And they brought him in expecting him to at least give them what Geno Smith has been giving them for the last couple of years, but because of his age, being able to grow into being a much better role. Now, I have Darnold a little bit higher than Geno, and I think Geno is sort of, Geno is what he's going to be. I think Darnold last year showed that there's a lot more meat on the bone there. There's a huge level of potential there, and I think Seattle feels that they have the right pieces in place here in the organization to complete what was started in Minnesota a year ago. So this is going to be a huge, huge X factor for what this offense's success is going to be. Because I can tell you right now, you can go over, and I know that TFG's already covered Seattle. He's got them lower than I do. He has Sam Darnold, I think, as like the 18th or 19th best quarterback. So he's a lot lower on Darnold than I am, which is reflective in the overall ranking of this team. So it does really, truly live and die with what Sam Darnold brings. And if he can stay in form, then this is going to be a great team. If he regresses back to what he was on the Jets, then this is going to be a nightmare season for Seattle. So I don't think it's going to get that bad, obviously, but I think it would be irresponsible for me not to point out the real possibility that it could, because we've seen it a million times. We saw it with, Nick Foles. We saw it with Matt Castle. These guys who had these great one-time, one-off seasons got paid a bunch of money and then went right back to being the quarterback that we all knew and loved or didn't love prior to that. So Darnold could potentially fall into that category. So that's something that Seattle fans need to maybe adjust some of their maybe high expectations some might have. And maybe I got to adjust my expectations a little bit too, because I do have him as the 7th best quarterback in the NFL this year. So there you go. Now we're here with the weapons, and they're tied for 23rd, 24th-ish. And this is what I was talking about in the onset. You got Cooper Kupp and you got JSN, who are basically the exact same player. One's a little bit older, one's a little bit more experienced, one has a little bit more pedigree, and one is way more injury prone. We'll say that. But we'll start with Cooper Kupp, who, like I said, was brought in because he knows this offense, he knows the system, he knows the demands of all the things that go into being specifically the slot wide receiver here. Now, he had 65% of his snaps last year out of the slot, almost 35% out wide. So he did play relatively, he had quite a bit out wide. So maybe he's the guy that they put out wide more often than not when they have 3 wide receivers on the field. Now, I can expect a lot of 12 personnel. We'll get to that shortly, but he's still a great route runner, deep and intermediate. Behind the line of scrimmage, he is falling off a little bit. He used to be a guy who used to get the ball in his hands, and he used to make really big plays, but I think as injuries start to pile up, age starts to get to him a bit here. That aspect of his game in the short to behind the line of scrimmage is just not going to be there. I think his ability to run effective routes and be really sure-handed, only 2 drops, 2.7% drop rate, that's where he's still going to be able to live and execute in his career. 73 catches, 800 yards last year. Only 278 yards after the catch. So that kind of goes again into what I'm saying with the short NBA and like the screen passes, tunnel screen game that when he was peak Cooper Kupp, he was really effective at. But the injuries are a concern, and it does pile up on you. And that's why when you see JSN here, who took almost 84% of his snaps out of the slot last year, it's almost like Cooper Kupp is here specifically just to show JSN the ropes and to show him, this is what the expectations are of you at this position. And because JSN still has that great athleticism to work in the short to behind the line of scrimmage with the tunnel screens and everything. So maybe he can fill in that spot. And Cooper Kupp just takes on more of a veteran physical role for this offense in the receiving sense. Because, again, only 2 drops, 2% drop rate. He hovers around a 50% contested catch, so he's a little bit more aggressive. He still had 482 yards after the catch, 100 catches, 1,100 yards, only 6 scores. But I think he, again, like I was talking about with who becomes sort of Sam Darnold's Justin Jefferson and who does it all in that sense, it's probably going to be JSN, while Cooper Kupp sort of just gradually tapers off throughout. But then it gets back to the argument of who's that outside speed threat, and the one that they went out and seemingly got that's a veteran is Marquez Valdes-Scantling, who, in terms of being a deep threat in speed, at this point in his career, that's always sort of been his rep. He's a little bit older. Is he still that enough where he can exploit what's surely going to happen, which is a much more condensed offense because of JSN and Cooper Kupp? We'll see how that works out. They got some other guys in there that could potentially break out, like a Jake Bobo, but then they also got Torrey Horton and Ricky White, the rookies, who, based on the personnel here, it's like they're screaming for one of these rookies to just explode onto the scene as like that outside threat wide receiver. And so how these guys all compete with each other, because it's a deep room, there's a lot of bodies. I feel like Steven Sims almost automatically makes the team as a return guy. So you're competing with Kobe White, you're competing with Jake Bobo, Marquez Valdes-Scantling, and even with this tight end room, because I think you're going to see a lot of the 12 personnel where you get Noah Fant out there with either an A.J. Barner or an Elijah Arroyo, who out of the University of Miami is a rookie, who I really like. I think there's a world where Noah Fant's not even on the field. You get Arroyo and Barner on the field at the same time playing tight end. But when you have Noah Fant, who has sort of been this steady receiving tight end to a degree, he's not ever broken out and lived up to the first round grade that he had, but 52.6% of his snaps in the slot, he's like this bigger slot guy. So again, he sort of falls into the same category as JSN and Cooper Kupp. So the redundancy just continues to pile on top of each other here. And he, 48 catches, 500 yards, 62 targets, doesn't do anything deep down the field, mostly operates, under 15 yards or less. I don't know where he fits in here, even though he does come out with the best grade out of all the tight ends for me. Elijah Arroyo and A.J. Barner just maybe seem like they're better suited players for this offense long term, because Noah Fant's kind of just established himself for what he is at this stage in his career. You still got these 2 young guys who, you can, A.J. Barner's a great blocker. A.J. Barner's going to play, I think, a lot more than people expect him to, just based on looking at the roster and the depth charts. But the X factor is Arroyo versus Noah Fant. And if they feel like they can get more true traditional tight end play out of Elijah Arroyo than they can at Noah Fant, then maybe Noah Fant is not necessarily long for this world here when he's going to be competing for snaps with Cooper Kupp and JSN in all reality, if they're going to use him to his best ability. And of the 3, he's obviously the third out of them, even as Cooper Kupp sort of naturally regresses throughout the year because of age and injuries, being burned out, being banged up. I don't think Cooper Kupp is, as long as he's healthy enough to play, is ever going to be a worse option than Noah Fant. So it's sort of developed in a way where Noah Fant is just a man without a home here. And then you work in the fact that you got Kenneth Walker and you got Zach Charbonneau and Charbonneau, and you got even Damian Martinez now from the University of Miami. There's a lot of here where is having Noah Fant even on this team worth it? Is the redundancy just to the point where you go, okay, something has to give here. We're not getting rid of JSN. We just brought in Cooper Kupp. They've drafted 2 tight ends now in back-to-back years. It has to be Noah Fant. So I would look at Noah Fant being a shocking 53-man roster cut potentially during preseason, or I'd say at the very least get moved sometime before the end of September to a team that needs to upgrade their tight end position. Maybe a team like the New York Giants who's looking to upgrade the tight end room, I think could be in play for something like that, depending on what they offer and what their needs are and what they get out of their guy like Theo Johnson and Daniel Bellinger and all that. But I don't think that Noah Fant lasts all that long just based on what we're seeing here with these skill sets. There's just no, doesn't seem like there's much of a place for him anymore. So here's the running back room, and they come in pretty much in the middle here. I know you're looking at some of the grades of Kenneth Walker and Zach Charbonnet, and you're going, they're pretty well graded. Damian Martinez at an 80, which is a really high grade for a rookie. I really like him. My concern is the overall health of this group. Kenneth Walker, I don't know, has Kenneth Walker even played a full season? There always seems to be this issue with Seattle since Marshawn Lynch left, with the top running back just being injury prone and overworked and just unreliable, because reliability is the best ability here. And he got about 150 carries last year, 573 yards, only 3.7 yards a carry, 7 touchdowns. He had 61 missed tackles forced on 150 carries. So he was doing a lot of this work. It's a 3.7 yards a carry. He was doing a lot of work on his own. A lot of that 3.7 yards per carry was all him. That's what that tells me. Yards after contact, 467 yards after contact out of 573 yards. Kenneth Walker was doing a lot of work on his own. So a lot of that falls on the offensive line that needs to drastically improve their ability to run block. But he also needs to stay healthy. Now, maybe a better offensive line where he's not doing all this work on his own behind the line of scrimmage, I could assume. Maybe he's able to be healthier, but I think them having Zach Charbonnet in there, I mean, Kenneth Walker, he can be this great all-around back, certainly be the guy that gets the most touches in a game. But I think if you want to lower that, you're not taking a significant step down in terms of the quality that you're getting, specifically on early downs. It sort of becomes like this Bijan Robinson, Tyler Algier situation where your backup is starting caliber, because you do have Zach Charbonnet, who is a starting caliber back, who had 125 carries last year, 4.2 yards a carry. He had 8 touchdowns, but kind of like Kenneth Walker, 452 yards after contact, 32 forced missed tackles out of 120 carries. So he's forcing a missed tackle every 4 carries and getting only 4.2 yards. So a lot of that, he's doing a lot of this work on his own. Again, didn't fumble the ball. He's a reliable ball carrier. I could see, especially because this zone heavy, Kubiak, Shanahan running system, that you're going to see a good, healthy rotation of the running backs here because you have such good quality on it. There's a reason why Kyle Shanahan almost every year drafted a running back on day 3, because he was going to be part of the rotation, keeping that healthy and not necessarily just running one guy into the ground, because you knew a big feature of your offense was going to be the running game. And I think that's where Zach Charbonnet really fits in here. I think he's going to fit in more so than he has at any other point in his career because of this offensive style. And you have to introduce Damian Martinez, who his carries are going to be dependent on the health of Kenneth Walker, I would say. But if the pattern holds, Damian Martinez is probably looking at 80 carries or so this season. And I think he can be somebody who could potentially run one of these backs out of town, kind of like what we saw with Noah Fant, where just the redundancy sort of screams that Fant is going to be somebody who gets moved, get a day 3 pick out of him. I could say the same thing for either Walker or Charbonnet at this point. Probably Walker, most likely, because I think that Martinez and Charbonnet can fill in together what Kenneth Walker has, and I think he could be super effective, and they don't really lose a whole lot, and there's more of a reliability in terms of their health. You even have Kenny McIntosh, who's going to work as a receiving game threat. He'll chime in those situations mostly, but to have 3 running backs who are going to be at least projecting to be effective across all 3 downs in all situations, you're going to have a guy who can be a quality player in all 3 of these situations. I think that's a really good asset. Again, it's worrisome. That's why they're 15th, tied for 15th. They kind of smack dab in the middle because the injuries do concern me to such a degree and because these guys did so much of this work by themselves, forcing so many missed tackles, at the line of scrimmage or just behind the line of scrimmage. And that if Sam Darnold doesn't perform, then a lot more of the pressure goes on to them. They're going to get worked a lot more. And then history dictates that they won't last the season. So that does hurt overall as well. Now moving on to this offensive line, and they're 20th in pass blocking, 20th in run blocking. So they're just outside the bottom 10 for me at this point. And a big reason is what they got going on the left side of the line. We'll talk about Charles Cross here, who has sort of established himself as like this high floor left tackle. 724 snaps last year, 8 penalties, 6 sacks. He was a solid left tackle. Very solid. He's a good player. Now he sort of falls into this category of it's sort of like what Kansas City had when Eric Fisher was at his peak. He's sort of becoming the Kirk Cousins of left tackles, where you can look at across the league and you can go, okay, I can get a guy who's a little bit better of a pass blocker. I can get a guy who's probably a little bit better of a run blocker. But are they available? And can I really? So they ran about 50-50 zone and 50-50 zone and gap runs last year, and he was a really good run blocker in both scenarios. Now, him being better at gap by like a full grade point compared to zone, that does drag down his score a little bit because of how zone heavy this offense is probably going to be. 370 run snaps, he's still a good, very good run blocking left tackle. Now you move to the rookie first-round pick, Gray Zabel, who comes in 453 snaps, gave up 1 sack, 7 penalties, only 7 pressures. He's coming in, he's going to play left guard. With those numbers, you'd probably expect him to have a higher grade, but, he does get punished a little bit for playing in college, number one, and for the level of competition that he was against. Still gets an 83 grade. I still think this was an amazing draft pick for them. It screams, him being in the organization that he was, in the program that he was, from a culture perspective, this is the kind of player that you want in there. Someone who thrives in that system and overcomes that perception that comes with playing in that division with that team to still be viewed as a first-round talent and a first-round pick. He did okay in run blocking as well. He's a better zone blocker than a gap blocker, which is going to work to his benefit here. And it was pretty obvious that that's one of the big reasons why they took him. They took him because of the athleticism. They took him because of the upside. And they feel like they can mold him in a way that suits the NFL style, the NFL play, but also because he kind of comes in foundationally working with what they have in this system. Now, what you have on the right side of the offensive line is littered in question marks. You have Anthony Bradford, who, up and down, but because of the way that the roster is structured, he's pretty much got this role ironed out to be his. I think the only competition he really is going to have, despite the gradings that they get, is Christian Haynes. Satuoa Laumia, I don't know if he's going to be able to, I don't know if he's seen as a prospect they can truly develop into being better. You have Abraham Lucas, who in his rookie season, along with Charles Cross that year, they looked like they were going to be the next great left-right tackle duo in the NFL, and that there was going to be some harsh decisions that had to be made about their contracts when they came up at pretty much the exact same time, being drafted the same year. Since that rookie season, Lucas has been, injury prone. He's been inconsistent in his play. He's regressed a lot in some ways. He just hasn't continued to build on what he showed as a rookie that season. They bring in Josh Jones, who can only play left tackle, so his job is actually relatively safe this year. It's interesting to see that this offensive line doesn't really have a whole lot of competition truly budding on underneath the surface here, and that they're really banking it on this very young offensive line that they're hoping can live up to its potential finally. Even Olu Oluwatimi, the center out of Michigan, who's been there for, I think, 2 years now. Very good in the run game, but, pass blocking, he's not great. Unfortunately, that means Gray Zabel as a rookie is probably going to find himself on a pass blocking island a lot, because unless Anthony Bradford all of a sudden steps up, that's probably where Oluwatimi is going to be sliding to in pass blocking situations. That's probably the guy that teams are going to be picking on a lot too. So that's going to be something you're really going to have to watch. And again, this offensive line hung this offense out to dry a lot in some key situations, which has led to limited success for this team, despite strong quarterback play otherwise, despite the talent that they've had at wide receiver, despite the talent they've had at running back and how athletic those guys are and how elusive those guys are. They've just kind of hung them out to dry. So this offensive line, this is the year they really need to come together. And hopefully with this very production-friendly system that they're bringing in with a high-level offensive coordinator, this is the year that they finally get it together and we see progression from the four guys who aren't rookies, and then we see Gray Zabel sort of live up to these grades that I've given him. I think you hope that they can outplay these 20th rankings for the betterment of this offense, because overall this is the anchor that's dragging this offense down in the grand scheme of things, as you'll see by the final grades of the offense. So again, despite the offensive line issues, this is my 6th ranked offense. They have the 10th ranked offensive coordinator. They're 7th in pass offense, 16th in rush offense. Now, that's with an offensive line that I don't necessarily trust. So if this offensive line can develop, this offensive line can play strong and play reliable and just focus on playing as a complete unit with some chemistry and good, strong communication, and they really embrace the new system and they fit into the system really well, then this is going to be a really effective offense this year, because they have everything sort of in place here. It just needs to come together. Now going to the defensive side of the ball, this is Mike Macdonald's wheelhouse here. This is the thing that needs to continue to elevate. He took over Pete Carroll's defenses, which were kind of on the downward trend, and he kind of picked it up. He kind of leveled things back up. Now it's got to take it up a notch. Get the player development in. Grab some of these young players that you've taken over the last couple of years, and it starts here with the defensive line, and the edge room, with just a lot of edge players here on this roster. The defensive line, it's got a lot of depth. You're just sort of poking and waiting for who the breakout stars are going to be, particularly on the edge. And we start here with Boye Mafe, who, as an edge rusher, he comes in 75 grade. He was 62nd in pass rush win percentage, only 6 sacks on 576 snaps. 2 batted balls, 5 quarterback hits, 36 hurries. He just hasn't gotten to that great pass rusher, that number one pass rusher position that I think they were anticipating him being at this point. Now, he hasn't been a complete and total disappointment because he is an elite level run defender off the edge. He wasn't great in stops percentage, but that wasn't really his job. He did a great job of setting the edge, never really let anything get around him, and funneled the running game into some of the bigger bodies that he had there, those interior defensive linemen and linebackers. He did a really great job at that. He's a tremendous asset across all three downs in that sense. You just want him to get to like the number one edge rusher quality because he hasn't really gotten there. He's in fact probably the third best edge rusher on this roster by my estimation. Now, Derek Hall is probably the best one, but he doesn't bring anything to you in the run game. So he sort of sits there as the situational pass rusher while you have three other guys that are going to be competing for more regular snap counts. And, you got DeMarcus Lawrence coming over from Dallas, who I'd say is overall the worst of the three. I've never really liked DeMarcus Lawrence. Maybe I'm just a hater. Uchenna Nwosu's the veteran. He's more like a 3-4 outside linebacker type who, is going to play a little undersized, but he plays much better in the run than you would expect. But he's not a great pass rusher either. I'm incredibly high on Jared Ivey. He was a day 2 edge rusher for me in this last draft. I think he's a phenomenal player. I think he's the second best edge player on the roster overall. He's as good of an edge rusher as Derek Hall, and he's the second best run defender out of all the edge players too, by my estimation. Now, he did go undrafted, which is a red flag to a lot of things that maybe I'm missing about his assessment. Maybe it's a personality thing, an off the field thing. But from just what he showed from a talent perspective, man, he was undeniable. So I wonder where he fits in all this and why this happened. Why this was such a significant drop-off. Because we saw what happened to Will Johnson. We just covered it in the last video. Will Johnson, the corner from Michigan. He went from being cornerback 1. He fell to the second round because of injuries and all that. But it's not like he fell completely out of the draft. It's just an odd situation. And I wonder where he fits in. And, they picked him up for a reason. So hopefully he's able to show them what he's capable of as time sort of moves on here. Then you got the interior of the defensive line, which is a real strength here. They got 3 really good quality guys. Leonard Williams had defensive player of the year quality performance last year. It's just really difficult for an interior defensive lineman to compete with some of these superstar edge rushers and cornerbacks because they just come across as more exciting, I guess. But he was 20th in pass rush win percentage among interior defensive linemen. He had 11 sacks. And he played everywhere. He played, mostly in the B gap, the 3 technique, and the 4 tech. But he even got some outside edge snaps, which was fun. They played a lot of the bigger defensive tackles out there, like Draymond Jones and all that. Got some edge work. So they're not afraid to throw those guys out there as edges, especially in early down work. So maybe that's something that they do with Leonard Williams. And that allows Jerron Reed and Byron Murphy to play more traditional interior defensive lineman roles on early downs. And having that flexibility for Leonard Williams this late in his career is also a huge benefit. But what he was able to do against the run, he was 6th in stops percentage among interior defensive linemen, 41 stops. He was just great. It was arguably the best season of his career. And he's had some really great seasons going back to his time with the Jets and the Giants. So that's saying something that was probably his best season of his career last year. And to have that at this stage in his career is also just amazing. You were kind of expecting Byron Murphy to take on, comparing to Mike Macdonald defenses of the past, that Justin Madubuike spot where you had this breakout interior defensive lineman. I think a lot of people were expecting that to be Byron Murphy. Turns out it ended up being veteran Leonard Williams. Now, that doesn't degrade Byron Murphy. It's just, he was a rookie and, he got outplayed by 2 veterans. there's two veterans on this team that outplayed him and are just a little bit better than him and need better to project, Jerron Reed's the best interior pass rusher, I think, on the team, just by a little bit. Does lose a little bit in the run, but, Byron Murphy has 77 pass rush, 75 against the run. On pretty much any other roster that we've covered, at least to this point, he's a starter. He's a 3-down starter, and he's a quality starter. Borderline DT1, DT2. Here, he's interior defensive lineman number 3. But because of the question marks they have on the edge room, particularly for that early down work against the run and everything, he's probably going to see a lot of work as the 3 tech while Leonard Williams kicks out and plays some defensive end. They also got Riley Mills, who, a rookie coming in as well, who, as a pass rusher, he could be a fun little piece that they can put in there. Mike Morris hasn't really worked out. Quinton Bohanna is kind of what he is, not really exciting at all. So we'll see what they end up turning out in terms of all these defensive linemen, because as you can see, there's a lot of depth here. There's a lot of mixture of skill sets and, some younger guys, some older guys. Like, what's the balance that Mike Macdonald decides to go with here? Because he's not going to keep them all. He might keep all 5 edge rushers, but there's going to be probably only 4 interior defensive linemen that are kept. And the top 3 are right there. So between Mills, Morris, and Bohanna, who's the one that breaks out? Who's the one that takes that spot? That's going to be something to really watch. But this group is very interesting. You want them, if they can get something from the edge room that can knock this pass rush into the top 15, then it's a really solid defensive line that I think is going to work out well in their favor. Now, the linebacker room is very similar to what we have with the front 4, the defensive line. Got an interesting little mix here of linebackers. They complement each other really well. But there's just, where's the high-end talent? You're waiting for that high-end talent to break out. Now, you got Tyrese Knight, who in coverage, he's the coverage guy. He's the one that's going to be playing in the passing situations. Allowed less than 100 in passer rating when targeted. Only 1 touchdown allowed. 35 catches allowed, less than 300 yards. So he did a good job of keeping everything in front of him. In terms of his run defense, he was it just wasn't a thing for him. He was 80th in stops amongst linebackers. He didn't miss a lot of tackles, but he didn't make a lot of tackles. So we'll see how that sort of progresses here as he's going to get more playing time now in this defense. And then you got Ernest Jones, who they brought in to basically be the opposite of that. He's the run guy. He's a starting quality early down linebacker who isn't all that terrible truly in pass coverage. He just gives up a lot of bad plays in coverage sometimes. He kind of loses himself when he's in zone coverage. Lets a lot of guys just sort of run by him unabated on their routes. When you have these linebackers that play in these zones, these middle zones, there is a levity of being able to knock a guy off his route as he walks by you, without taking an illegal contact penalty. There's a trick and a technique to it that you see guys like Fred Warner really master. CJ Mosley did a really good job at it. Ernest Jones just doesn't even make that effort. And I think that leaves, them vulnerable when they're in more traditional zones like cover 2s for these shallow drags and these sort of these intermediate crossing routes to sort of get by him unabated, and then they're easy pickings for the quarterbacks because, there's, and also a lack of communication as well could be an issue. I don't know. I don't have a microphone on the field, but it does come across that way sometimes just from watching, that you see a lot of the box safeties sort of turn and be with their hands out where the catch happens sort of in that area. And it's are they looking at Ernest Jones and being dude, what the hell? Type of a deal. We don't know, but just based on what happens when he's on the field and the ball sort of thrown in his general direction, in his general zone, it's usually an effective way for a team to get 10, 11, 12 yards more often than not. But they do complement each other well. They're sort of the exact same in terms of overall talent, just one's good at one thing and the other is good at the other. As you can see, at 80 in coverage for Knight, 80 in run for Jones, 72 run for Knight, 68 for Jones. Now, there's not a lot of linebacker depth on this team at all. There's Drake Thomas who gets grades, and then there's 3 guys who I didn't grade at all. Yeah. So it is the weak part of this defense. But Mike Macdonald has always liked to operate with some quality linebackers. You saw it in Baltimore with Roquan and Patrick Queen, and even, to a degree at a couple, So you want to identify who on this roster, who's Patrick Queen, who's Roquan Smith. And I don't know if they necessarily have that. I guess Tyrese Knight is the best shot at him developing that. So we'll check on his development skills as a coach, and from the defensive staff's perspective, Aiden Durd and his coaching staff's perspective on the defense side of the ball, and how they get Tyrese Knight in year 2 to take that next step to the next level. Now we go to the secondary, and this is really the heart and soul of what this defense could be, and what has been carried over from those Mike Macdonald Baltimore teams is they had a strong, deep secondary with a variety of skill sets. And they're coming in tied for 9th in coverage, 17th against the run, but a really good coverage group with 2 quality corners here. Starts with Devon Witherspoon, who comes in 85 grade. He's mostly going to play in the slot. That's where he's really at his best. When they're in nickel personnel, he's going to bump in, but he does have that flexibility when to play outside as well, depending on what the matchup situation is. Now, you want him in zone. He's very aggressive. Like I said, that's why he's so great against the run and why he suits playing a nickel so well in those scenarios. But it does cause him to take some penalties, and it does cause him to get beat at times. He did give up 63 catches on 88 targets, which is a down year from what you hope so. We talked about it in the previous video. You want them to hover around that 45 to 55% completion percentage when targeted to get to that elite level. And he just wasn't at that, which is why his grade's only an 85. We'll see what he can progress here as they get another year in this system and sort of work together here. But I really like Devon Witherspoon's potential. I think his versatility suits this defense perfectly because Mike Macdonald loves these versatile defensive backs to be able to sort of play them all over the place. And, you get Tariq Woolen, who's just 100% an outside corner. So to have that role also kind of really established for you is important as well. Tariq Woolen is like this lengthy, fast, athletic corner, but doesn't play great man coverage. He gets caught taking penalties a lot, being a little grabby. It does help him. He counteracts it with great pass breakups. He has 3 interceptions, but he gives up 6 touchdowns. He had a pretty good target to reception ratio, but you want to see him play a little bit more consistently than what we've seen out of him since his rookie season. But I think that there's exponential amounts of growth. I think his lack of versatility kind of does hurt him in this defense because it does limit what they can do with him. But that doesn't take away from the fact that him being an outside corner and taking a whole side of the field to himself, while you have this variety of other defensive backs out there, especially you get these 3 safeties, Kobe Bryant, Julian Love, and Nick Manwari, who are basically playing Geno Stone, Marcus Williams, and Kyle Hamilton from that dominant Ravens defense that got Macdonald this job. Now, who's the other outside corner out of this group? Josh Jobe is there. I really like Zy Alexander, the rookie. There's a lot of rookies on this team I was very high on, and he's one of them. I like him more than I like Josh Jobe. I think Josh Jobe just doesn't have the ceiling for it. I think Zy Alexander can step in and really shock people by stepping in and playing that role. We got Kobe Bryant, who converted to more of a safety role. I think he can play some slot as well if you want to mix and match in when you have these 3 safeties. Nick Manwari is going to be your center fielder. He's going to be that center third guy. He's going to be that Geno Stone, where he's going to just dominate in the passing game. Don't know what he's going to do in the run game all that much, but deep center field, ball hawk on the back end, while everyone else sort of does all this mishmashing of roles and, schemes and disguises and everything. The one guy who just definitely broke out in this defense playing that Kyle Hamilton role that we saw Kyle Hamilton just dominate in since the day he got into the league is Julian Love. The former Giants player, he was a slot guy, converted to safety, and now here has really embraced that safety role. 699 snaps there. He took 222 box snaps, 122 slot snaps, but he had 8 pass breakups. He had 3 interceptions, gave up 5 touchdowns, but only gave up 351 yards. So when he was targeted, there wasn't a whole lot of success there. Despite, 56 targets, 35 receptions. It's still, it's not the greatest number. You want to see that reception rate come down just a little bit. But he was a great tackler, super aggressive and physical in the run game. He the definition of a breakout performance and a breakout player. Now, are there limitations to his skill set and coverage? I would say yes. Just because he's not the fastest guy in the world, so his sideline-to-sideline ability just really isn't there. But when you bring in Nick Emmanwori to play that role, now he doesn't have to necessarily be that guy, and he can just play more settled and aggressive, cover 2 safety in a sense, and then drop down into the flats, blitz, play closer to the line of scrimmage, play some middle zone there. When they're more in a cover 3 role, cover 3 situation, he can come up and play tighter to the line of scrimmage, work on those tight ends and those slot guys, and be a great complement on the opposite side of Devon Witherspoon. And then, you have Kobe Bryant out there, and you can disguise what either one of these guys is going to be doing situationally. Now, the depth at the safety position, I'm not a real big fan of, but you can run a lot of 2 safeties. You can run 3 safeties. You can mix and match a lot of these defensive backs to just really drive offensive coordinators crazy the way that we saw Mike Macdonald defenses do in the past. They definitely have the bodies to make that work on the back end here. And all you need is someone like Josh Jober, Zy Alexander to just really get it and grasp this system and excel in it. And then boom, you've all of a sudden now elevated them even further. So this is a really good group, and this is really going to drive what this defense is really capable of this year, more so than I think any other defense. But overall, it's still my 20th ranked defense, 16th against the pass, 19th against the run. And that's all really just because of the lack of faith in the pass rushing aspect. The linebackers kind of just keep everything balanced. It's the pass rush. It's just feeling like there's no real edge threat out there that drags down what this defense could potentially be. And I don't know how much you can scheme up the lack of edge talent that they have in a pass rushing sense. It's going to be a real tough task for Durd and for Macdonald and that defensive staff to really put it all together. And, again, it will live or die really by what the defensive back group can do, but you also can't just hang them out to dry because there is only so many coverage sacks that they can produce. Now, this schedule has them where they're Vegas over under 7.5 wins. Bet the over. There isn't a single game in here where I go, they're for sure going to lose, which is the rarity of that you're going to see in this series, especially a team ranked here in the bottom half of the league, is kind of unheard of here. And this is a division there where this schedule really benefits. All 4 of the teams in this division, because 2 of them are still to come, could all finish above 500. And I think that, 8 wins when you play New Orleans, Tennessee, and Indianapolis, you get 3 wins right there. You play Arizona twice, you should get 1. You'd hope. You hope you can get 3 divisional wins out of that. So now you're at 6 wins. You get Jacksonville. Yeah, you're on the road, but you still get Jacksonville. You get Carolina. Yeah, you're on the road. You still get Carolina. You get Atlanta. You're on the road, but you still get Atlanta. It's all right there, man. You get a good draw of some of these better teams at home. You get Tampa at home. You get Houston at home. You get the Minnesota Vikings at home. So even the teams that are going to be ranked ahead of you, you are getting them on your home field, which is going to be extremely beneficial for you as well. So this is, again, bet the over on Seattle. This schedule looks real good for them, and they could get into the playoffs with this schedule, kind of like their division rivals Arizona could sneak in as well. It could, just on the schedule, I don't know that there's a whole lot stopping from all 4 of those teams being in the playoffs, just based on what the schedule can present to them. So I would watch out for that. There's going to be some really good win-loss records at the very least in the NFC West. So overall, they are my 18th team, 23rd head coach, number 6 in offense, 20th in defense. I think that, the offense could probably is a real X factor to do worse than the number 6, and I think the defense is an X factor to do better than 20th. It all depends on that number 23 ranked head coach, to be honest, and how they develop the trenches, because the offensive line and the defensive line are the 2 biggest X factors on both sides of the ball for this team, just based on the lack of realized talent and the hopes for development of said talent. And there it is, my number 18 team, the Seattle Seahawks, in my 2025 NFL Deep Dive series. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. Sorry, Seahawks fans, you're getting there, and you put your eggs all in the Sam Darnold basket. I hope it works out for you guys. Please like the video. You can leave your thoughts in the comment section below. Subscribe, of course. And I will see you guys with the next video next time. We're approaching right smack dab in the middle almost. So see you guys in the next one. Bye.